In this video, we are going to check out the JSON properties behind a table object with the ArcGIS API for Python. So open up the table properties.py script from the table object folder. Let's take a look at the JSON properties for a table object exposed through the properties property for a table object. Up top, we are importing our GIS class so we can access our ArcGIS Online content. And we'll also import the FeatureLayer collection class to create a FeatureLayer collection object from which we'll access a table object. We first access ArcGIS Online using the GIS class and define the home string. We'll assign our GIS object to a variable called AGOL. We're going to use our GIS object and access the content manager and use the get method where we'll supply in our feature service item ID, which I'll paste into my notepad. The get method will return an item object that will assign to a variable called item. We're then going to use the FeatureLayer collection class and the from item method, supplying in our item object as the item parameter to create a FeatureLayer collection object that will assign to a variable called FLC. We now want to access a table object. We're going to use our FeatureLayer collection object and the tables property using indexing to access the first table in our feature service, which is our table for training with FDM 1-to-1. This will return a table object that will assign to a variable called table. We then want to print the properties to screen. So we use the Python print statement. We call our table object and the properties property. And that's all we need to do. So let's run the script and inspect the JSON properties behind the table object. You can see that our table has an ID of 4. We saw this in the previous video where 4 was at the end of the REST service URL for the table. You can see the name is of type table in comparison to a feature layer, which has a type of feature layer. The service item ID is the item ID for a feature service item where the table comes from. We have the description that we set when we created the table. We have no copyright text, but we're going to update this in the next video. You can see relationships is a list and there is no current relationship. We are going to add one in a later video. It does support append and it supports calculate, so we can use the append method with a table object and also the calculate method, and it also supports truncate. Let's scroll down. We can see that there are plenty of other properties here available. Some can be updated using the ArcGIS API for Python and others are system maintained. If I scroll down to the bottom here or close to it, we can see the fields that we created when we were creating the table, our object ID field and our park name field, which is a string, and we set an index. Well, we set one index and that was the primary key for the object ID. And this time I'll go right down the bottom where we can see capabilities, and it is currently only query, so we cannot edit the table, but we're going to update that also in a future video. We go back up to our script and I'll comment out where we print the properties for the table. And in the second example here, I'm just going to show that we can access individual table properties with dot notation. I'm going to use this comprehension here to return a table object. So for each table object in our item object tables property, if the table property's name is equal to table for training with FDM 1-to-1, then return that table object in the list. This comprehension always returns a list and we'll be interested in the first element, the first table object returned, which will assign to a variable called table. We're then going to print the name, the type, if attachments have been enabled, the OID field and the capabilities. And you can see we are accessing each of these using dot notation for name, type, has attachments, object ID field and capabilities, and all of these would have been visible in the properties that we printed. So I'll run the script and we can see that we were returned the name, table for training with FDM 1-to-1, type is table, attachments is false, that attachments are not enabled for this table, but we will use the ArcGIS API for Python to enable those attachments in a later video. The OID field we set as object ID, and our capabilities are currently set to query. So we've successfully accessed the JSON properties for a table object using the ArcGIS API for Python. Make sure to continue on to the next video in this series, and also make sure to subscribe. Take care.